Lucas, we've got major news from the Kennedy campaign, so I don't know if you had a chance to catch up on this one, but looks like the Libertarian Party has broken with the what is it? They've got the endorsed candidate. So you found this one. This is great. So this is Chase Oliver, right? So here's the guy that they chose to be the Libertarian candidate. No problem with him hanging out with whoever he wants to hang out with, but apparently the Colorado party has decided that they want to put Kennedy at the top of the ticket, so he's going to be on the ballot on the Libertarian Party uh, ticket for Colorado. That's seems like pretty big news to me.
I mean, Grant, my when I think about the Libertarian Party, I often think that every move that an organization that is about not that is about no coercion is bound to be fraught with irony. So, Chase Oliver was an interesting pick for the from the Libertarian Convention, and if you go back to that picture, I mean, it's him wearing a mask, and the tacit support of the federal government telling people what to wear. Kind of also, that's what really gets me about Chase Oliver is some of his positions that are that piggyback on this notion of the federal government being able to step in at the level of public safety. So I kind of raised my eyebrow when he was chosen, but I've long since left the Libertarian Party. You told me that he doesn't support Ron Paul. I didn't know that. Where did you see that?
I'm going to have to dig that one up. Yes, I saw that there was significant division amongst the Libertarian Party that said there's this Ron Paul faction that's been staunch supporters of him for a long time, and apparently there's a schism between these two camps. The folks that said, yeah, Chase Oliver should be the guy, and some people who thought this is not the right guy, and apparently it splits along those lines. Let me see if I can track that down. Give me 1 second.
I don't know that we discuss the Libertarian National Convention when it happened, because Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump both appeared. Joe Biden was also invited, but it's probably a little bit obvious why he couldn't make that engagement now. Maybe obvious because of his performance in the last debate, but also because of his administration's positions. But I thought Bobby Kennedy had a decent speech there. Was maybe a little bit more aligned with the libertarians with regard to his policies, with his concerns about the government policies that were enacted during COVID. Again, going back to Chase Oliver's mask in that picture is just kind of shocking that he flouts that unapologetically. Chase Oliver does not represent most libertarians, and few of us will be supporting. I don't even know who Clint Russell is, but
Yeah, it's not that Clint Russell, so I might not have seen it when I put this up, but like this is documenting it, and I saw a few other things that said essentially this same line is there are the Ron Paul libertarians, and then there's the Chase Oliver libertarians, and they were fighting over this endorsement because many thought that Chase Oliver didn't represent the party in the way that Ron Paul did, and that this has been a significant deviation from what the party stands for. So this has got several documented things where people are talking about this, and it's just one of several. So I brought this up as an example to help drive the point home that there was this big debate between these two camps, and it largely fell along these lines of Chase versus Ron and the supporters thereof.
And to me, in every one of the parties, or in all the parties, there seems to be a big distinction between their policy solutions, and it all goes down to money. Do they believe, which is a conversation we're going to get into in a little bit, this notion of fiat money, whether people think that money should behave like a rock or money should behave like water. and that seems to be a continuum. But if you can print money based on debt, it gives you a lot of different policy solutions than some sort of notion of how much specie gold silver do you have in a vault somewhere, and what can you do with that. But going back to the
What,
libertarian,
yeah. Let's stay on that for just a second, because this is this is interesting, where you have the state national divisions between the camps, right? Because I think when you have an endorsing convention and you say you're a party, it's really weird that the party, I mean, obviously it's the Libertarian Party. If there's anybody that's going to break with the centralizing part of it, it's going to be the Libertarians. But to have a party and to say, hey, we got together and we endorsed a candidate, and then have rebellion within the ranks, that's either really healthy or really unhealthy. I think it's really healthy, but I could hear the argument the other way. But it's
you won't hear it from me. I think it's absolutely healthy. Um,
but
uh,
it speaks to what is the point of a party if you can't unify and actually come up with something that you're going to do. Then you're maybe more of just like a loose confederation. I don't know, like there's something about that that says, if the intention of a party is to unify and to come behind something and to find a common goal with which you could possibly be successful, I think this shows that the Libertarian Party cannot be successful. But I like the fact that people are speaking their minds and going whatever way they think is right. But it doesn't speak a lot towards the unification of the
well,
idea.
I mean, the goal is is not even to elect candidates. The goal is to promulgate ideas, and to me, that is what the parties are absolutely about. A lot of flack gets thrown the way of parties, even more so candidates. But in reality, parties are where people who are serious and seriously, it's a safe space for people to get together and talk about policy agendas. And there
I
are
think it's in a situation like this where the party actually should be splitting in two. If you have this big of a division in your party and you're clearly divergent in your thinking, and it gets to the point where you can't agree on your top candidate because of fundamental policy differences, that's almost where you need to be thinking about, well, we're probably two parties and we're not really aligned on what we're trying to do here.
I mean, absolutely, and it's not as if we haven't seen the Democratic Party split during the Clintons between blue collar union workers or NAFTA globalism. I think part of the reason the Clintons draw so much flack is because they abandoned union nationalism protection in favor of I don't know, Walmart globalism.
Yeah,
And
those more centralist policies.
well, and then you see now the Republican Party, like certainly Trump, the Tea Party leading into the election of Trump, and MAGA, America Mission now is all about this sort of the same issue. Like, are we going to have nationalist policies, or are we going to have world policies? And again, I think that's very much a monetary discussion. Like, if you can print and continue to create money, then you can try to have global policies rather than national policies. But even in the Republican Party right now, we're seeing more of the globalists, the rhinos, the neocons
Well, I
being.
think that there is a strong split between in the Republican Party. That definitely tracks with their inability to keep a Speaker of the House. Their inability to unify and get anything done, just because there's two parties there. There isn't one, and that's kind of the whole part of this discussion is what happens when that actually occurs. I think we've seen it occur at a national level amongst the Republicans, because you've got the far right Republicans who vehemently disagree with what the more moderate or centrist Republicans are thinking.
Well, and I've mentioned before, and I mean, everybody talks about, oh yeah, the parties have switched positions, but they didn't necessarily switch positions, as they switched this, like internally focused versus externally focused, and that had everything to do with the alteration of the election of senators to break the cabals of the states the and that again, it goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. But even before then, and it's why I want to talk about, we changed the monetary system, and that's what allowed big business and trusts, quote unquote trusts, and the Roosevelt trust busting, to exert such outsized power. Whereas before, when
That
we
reminds me of those political cartoons that I've seen from those times, where they would draw the trusts as these huge, evil looking fat cat, whatever, that were trying to eat everything in America. That I remember the trust busting. That was the huge thing during that era, right?
absolutely, and but the sad thing was that it was what needed to be undone was the notion of a national banking system, and uh, the logical tricks that were placed on America, or the Union might be a better term, a political term, the Union of States, in order to enforce and create that national banking system, were not undone. And so again, attacking the people rather than the system that was created did not. I mean, do we live in a world where corporations aren't running things? I don't think so. And so that's why I think we are the monetary discussion, and crypto, Bitcoin, the the view that they have given people on history and money is the political revolution that we see today. But let's not go too quickly to legal tender. Let's go back to let's talk about Chase Oliver and Bobby Kennedy. And I mentioned the national convention. The we had a discussion the other day about Bobby Kennedy's insertion, a live streaming of the debate, and how that was a ground shift in the world of politics. I think we will see more politicians using technology in such a way to get their message out. Brilliant by
Well, and
Bobby
and
Kennedy.
in media itself, because now it used to be that you had to be on TV to get access to a wide audience, but I think we've seen, with the rise of what's going on in X and then alternative platforms and just streaming video on the internet, it has become much more accessible to be able to get access to huge audiences and in
And
real time.
and also to be able to address a party that he's not necessarily aligned with, like ballyhoo for Trump and Bobby Kennedy for going to the Libertarian National Convention. It may have played out very much differently for Joe Biden if he had like given the time to go and make his case and make his message at the Libertarian Convention. Because even though they're not a great, like, large voting bloc, I think a lot of independents in the parties become more and more understanding of the libertarian, like, coercion based concerns, especially like in the wake of COVID, in the wake of the revelation of the censorship with Russiagate, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but Donald Trump at that convention. Did you happen to catch his speech? And Bobby Kennedy's was great, but Donald Trump's, I thought, showed him to be as great an orator as William Jennings Bryan. Did you listen to his speech there?
I didn't catch it, but I'm going to have to check it out now.
Well, and I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. And part of the reason that it was brilliant is, Donald Trump much more represents, even though he courts and I think tries to. I mean, I think he's a brilliant politician in that he both is maybe naturally aligned with neocon rhino policies, but he is always seeking, and part of his message is one that appeals to the blue collar, conservative message of the Republican Party.
Well, one thing I think may be starting to happen, and it's definitely just a time thing. We're going to see this happen in next election cycle, probably even more pronounced, is that there were these voting blocks of, the baby boomers that were watching cable TV that you could pretty well rely on to vote. And at this point, we're starting to see that aging out. Those folks are moving into nursing homes and, into assisted living and care and what have you. And I don't think they've got the mental capacity to really pay attention to politics like they used to. And they're certainly not going to be making it a priority to go vote. This is kind of end of life care that's happening for a significant portion of the populace. And so you now see politicians having to say, well, wait a minute, where is our voting block going to come from? And we can't alienate big swaths of the electorate that care about certain issues. I think the first place that we saw this was with, drugs and marijuana. That was certainly a voting block that has been expressed in many states. And so you're starting to see a shift on that policy, because if you're going to continuously fight a war on drugs and there's a bunch of states that are rebelling against that, you're not going to find common ground with people that are saying, no, we think this is fine. The same thing with crypto. If you have this war on crypto, which has been happening ever since, Operation Choke Point got going in earnest, that's not resonating with a lot of the electorate, because many people have crypto, they're trading crypto, and they're saying that this is not something that we want to see be illegal. So, you're seeing politicians start to scrounge and fight for votes where they maybe didn't have to do that as much. And I think this is courting of the Libertarian Party would be another good example where this same kind of a thing is happening. You've got this pretty sizable block. I think the Libertarian Party oftentimes pulls 1 to 3% of the vote. That's going to start to mean a lot more when you see the big bulk of the votes that were getting cast for Republican and Democrats start to dwindle because of the populace aging out that were largely voting in those elections.
I put a link for the Walker America over in the private chat. If you'd pull that up, did you happen to see this video with Jack Mallers talking about inflation? Because I thought it's brilliant, and it addresses where the sort of the rubber meets the road with inflation. The politicians and economists love to talk about price inflation and ignore the problem of monetary base inflation, and they are correlated. You make more money out there, it has an effect on prices, and it's not the other way around. And what that does is well known by economists, at least, and probably never understood by most politicians. If we're making more money and I owe you a debt, then I, the person who owes the debt, am on the winning side of that monetary base inflation. Because if I owe you $500 and there's a $1 million in the world today, and I owe you $500 tomorrow, and there's $2 million in the world tomorrow, then I really sort of in some way only owe $250, right?
Yep, I'm following you.
And so that is you think about like the problems that we have with hedge funds and private equity, and which is also exacerbated by the fact that we have now, we talked about interest rates at the Federal Reserve and how it's easy to be borrowing debt, and there is no tax for borrowing debt. Then the institutions that understand that there's going to be more money and more money in the future, and that it is better to be an owner of debt than a debtor, than a debtor than a hodler, which also gets to this whole fascination with the Bitcoin community about hodling, where and trying to get back to a stable currency where you can get out of the debt cycle. Anyway, it's a great video.
Right. I loved it. I did watch it, and I did catch that one. So I thought it was a really interesting way to put it, especially the way that he talks about if you were to measure what it costs in time and energy to do things, right? Because it's giving you a different way to think about how much time do you have on this planet, right? And how much energy do you have to put into anything? And if you relate that to the amount of money that you make and then what you can buy with it, we've had tremendous gains in technology. If you look at the computer that you can buy for $500, $1,000, far outstrips anything you could have bought, 10, 20 years ago. And so that sort of train has been giving us a lot of stuff, and the growth in technology and the growth in productivity has given us a lot of stuff, but it's been offset by this massive theft of our time and energy through inflation. So I thought it really drove the point home very well. And the way that people that are staunchly for Bitcoin have been saying this is a way to exit that system. By being in Bitcoin, you're essentially moving outside of the zone where you can just arbitrarily have your time and energy stolen away from you in this very insidious way that in times past seemed very small but have start to become very pronounced. So if you see some of these guys that are posting and saying, hey, I pulled up my grocery bill from 2 years ago and I tried to order the same thing, it's gone up substantively. So this idea that we're at 3 or 4% inflation, anybody can look at the prices of things and say that's just not the case. Like, things have gotten way more expensive, and it's basically happened right through COVID. So we saw massive inflation that occurred through that period of time, and some of it exacerbated by large corporations taking exorbitant amount of profits, which have been reported.
We have these words too: libertarian, liberty, libre. That comes to us from Latin and the notion of air. Libre is the notion of air. Aire libre. Freedom is something altogether different. I put another link over in the private chats. Free imperial cities. Free, I've mentioned before, comes to us from the Norse god Freya, and Freya was the mother, or the goddess. She's the mother god, the wife god, and just like kingdom. Dumb in Norse languages means the place of. So freedom is the place of home, and it comes going also back to this like true notion that we were stepping away from the separation of church and state, the political organization of Europe, in which you had the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church that were laid over each other, both with the ability to tax. Free imperial cities were those with no taxes, and so the liberty to seek freedom. It's interesting now that we equate freedom with liberty, but really also going back to this notion that a fiat currency system is one that has a hidden tax on people who are trying to step out of the cycle. It's important to understand that would have been antithetical to the original understanding of what's, if not the founders of the United States, at least the pilgrims who were running from Europe, 100 years earlier, 200 years earlier.
Yeah, I don't think they would have recognized this country in the way that we live under the burden of taxation. But then again, I don't think our standard of living would have in any ways been recognizable to them either. Because that was a hard life, man. So like, if you took anything from somebody who has a hard life, you make their life even harder to the point where that's almost a death sentence, right? If you have almost nothing and you tax somebody who has almost nothing, then you're taking away even that which they have. And that's essentially, you might as well just be signing a death warrant to them. Whereas in our modern world, we've got much more abundance because we have machines and productivity gains that have allowed us to do things that would never even been conceived of back in times past. So I definitely see there's this difference in the way that people thought about freedom and the amount of taxation they were willing to live under. And I don't think that the way that we're thinking about freedom in this day and age is more about the freedom of what you're capable of doing or what you're allowed to do, without having somebody else come tell you that you're not allowed to do it. Like, that seems to be more, well, how we think about freedom. What am I free to do? do? What am I free to do with my time, rather than, am I free from the burden of living within a society or government taxation?
Well, and I just think because I'm not an anarchist, and I think that you cannot have a political you can't have political order without figuring out what you share, and the reason that we talk so much about property rights in the United States was because there was an understanding that land would be shared, owned by the states, tied to some sort of religion, and the property rights would be the distinguishing like thing that separated citizen from citizen. But when I think about freedom and liberty, because also there's all this talk about rights come from a notion of God, like natural rights, God-given rights, and now we talk about constitutional rights given to us by a piece of paper, but enforced by whom? And and so to me, when we talk about freedom, maybe we should be thinking in terms of, can you afford it? Because if freedom had some sort of notion of stepping outside of the system, maybe the difference between liberty and freedom is whether we can afford something, and also whether we can do it. Grant, I lost you for a second. Welcome back. Are you here?
Yeah, I'm still here. No worries. I heard everything you said.
Anyway, we keep going off on tangents. Let's go back to Trump and the libertarian convention, because I wanted to get to what he did so masterfully.
Well, I want to say one last thing on the topic that we had.
Okay.
With the rise of personal power, and we sort of spoke to this a little bit about in our modern technological society. I would say that things that have happened, like East Palestine, Ohio, right, where the town gets chemo nuked by the decisions of some small cadre of folks that decide that they're going to run polyvinyl chloride, fluorine through their town, and it derails it. That's conceived of.
You're breaking up a little bit, Grant, but you said East Palestine, the notion of freedom and rights, and how the East Palestine. What was that?
Well, just that individuals can have such a large effect on like a large geography. That's what I was trying to get the point across, is that with our modern technology and our modern science, you're really able to affect a lot of people with a very small amount of effort. That never could occur in the past.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think this is also why it's very important to bear in mind what incorporation meant. Incorporation meant like incorporating into the tax code. There was no concept of a federal corporation for the first 100 years of the union, and part of that was because the people were wary of having organizations that were larger than people who shared the land. And again, also, like I think it's very important to remember at what point we were sharing something apart from a national currency. The Go ahead.
So let's move on to Trump. So you wanted to say some stuff about Trump, and that he's the next coming of William Jennings Bryant.
Well, I don't know about that. But
Well, I
Trump,
don't know. You made some parallels. So I don't know. Maybe unpack that a bit and tell us why you think he's the next great orator. I'm not sure where you were going with it, but it
well,
caught my ear when you said it.
Well, William Jennings Bryan was a great orator. His speech that man shall not be crucified on a cross of gold, which I think everyone should go back and listen to or read and think about. Think about that phrase, crucified on a cross of gold, because we talk about like getting back to gold, the gold standard, and what that would mean for America. But there was a time whenever the People's Party, the Populist Party, was very wary of gold because the bankers had all the gold. And again, that goes back to this national banking system and how it was set up so that the
And we're
government.
not in a dissimilar situation with the concentration of holdings of Bitcoin. We talked about this a little bit yesterday about does it affect consensus? I was asserting that it didn't, but as far as does it affect the world if a small number of people hold the thing that is being used or that's being related as the asset, like what gold was, then we could end up with an entirely different kind of a problem here.
Absolutely, and that is something that I think blockchains are the blockchains that figure out how to distribute the network's support and the distribution of the assets, tokens, whatever that are on it are going to be next level. But going back to Trump,
Well,
so
well,
Trump.
well, well. Let just one thing on that. So Bitcoin absolutely had a fair distribution. So we're not talking about whether Bitcoin had a fair distribution because it clearly did. If you did the work, you got the reward. The thing is that a lot of people thought Bitcoin wasn't worth anything, so they let their coins go for very cheap prices because they didn't think that it was going to be used as a reserve asset. And so the concentration of holdings of Bitcoin, and it's still happening today because a lot of people are swooping up Bitcoin, is just that a lot of people say, well, it isn't worth anything, and so I don't want to hold it. And so they don't realize that other people are sort of moving in a much different direction, and they may be missing a significant shift that's happening here. So I would say, as far as everything you described, I believe Bitcoin did pull that off and did it well and did it correctly. It's just that some of the people that got those coins lost them, mishandled them, let them go for cheap, and like that just was the nature of the beast because it didn't seem like maybe this was going to be the thing, and suddenly now it is the thing.
Well, and I 100% agree with that. I think the genius and the true success of the Bitcoin was the block rewards and the release of the coins in such a way, and also the shadowy disappearance of the founder in order to keep that keep that like party that might be manipulated at bay. But even though that party was sort of disappeared and was not subject to capture, I guess the problem that I see is there were more dollars out there, and the people who have bought Bitcoin, the fact that you could go out and buy Bitcoin on an exchange and you could get it by those not necessarily fair means has presented the problem. And that it took so long for people to understand the inflation of the monetary supply of dollars, and that was not evenly reflected in the price of a Bitcoin, is to me also part of the problem, although it may be rectified. But we'll see how that plays out. I think having a conversation about the legal tender acts of 1862 in 1863 and how they played out might give us a light into what we'll see there.
Well, and the cross of gold, this was the bankers had all the gold and the farmers didn't, because I think that largely a lot of these things aligned this way. It was urban versus rural. It's like you just want to move our money around, kind of the camp of we're the actual producers that are making the food and doing things out here in the world. And this monetary policy that is in place, when you guys have all the gold and we're in a deflationary system, then what we produce is worth less than the things you already have. And that, I think, was railed against, because it's like we're producing the real stuff, and every year you're valuing our stuff less than last year. And so if I have to borrow or take out any kind of a debt and it's denominated in specie, and that which I can produce is worth less than the previous year, I can never get out from underneath that rock that was put around my neck.
Amen. Amen. And this is the problem with the national banking, the national monetary system, the national bank system. This is the reason that the federal government was limited to specie and the states were barred from making fiat currencies. And because it was the idea that if you were to embark on creating a fiat currency that you would not have access to the taxing system, you would not be supported by the government, and you could fail. And whenever we eradicated that buffer between in our money system, our monetary systems, we immediately saw a capture. Yeah, I mean, if capitalism is allowing, and everyone talks about like capitalism and how it's wedded to democracy, yay! But we don't have true capitalism anymore because nobody fails. We just print more and more money so that politicians can tell everybody that nobody has failed. So now you're blackpilling me. Trump. So Trump in the speech. So Trump again, very like the policies.
So this was the speech that Trump gave before the Libertarian Convention. Maybe I'll try and grab it quick.
Yeah, the speech that he gave before the Libertarian Convention. If you can find it, what's so remarkable about it is that Trump goes into this speech knowing that he's not popular with libertarians. Why? Because libertarians aren't going to, most libertarians are not going to be hoodwinked by his appeals to conservatism, uh, and are honestly pissed about the amount of dollars that he created in his administration. And not only the amount of dollars that he created in his administration, regardless as to whether, I mean, Trump had a lot of battles to fight, especially with regards to Russiagate. But with his response to COVID, I would say that there were some very coercive policies that came out of that. So libertarians weren't necessarily thrilled about him. And did he go in there and point a finger at them and tell them that they were wrong? I don't like. There was in the Utah Republican convention, Spencer Cox nearly lost his primary election because he was very combative with his supporters with the Republicans in regard to some of the COVID policies and other policies of the state of Utah. But Trump comes in and if we listen to it, and I don't necessarily want to, but everybody should. He has a sense of humor, and he's booed over and over and over, and he just pauses and he lets people boo, and he says, "What do you want to keep winning? You're 3%." He says, "You want to be winners? Why don't you pick something else?" And just like his ability to mollify a crowd that was so against him, and to joke with them, and to also like come at them at their greatest vulnerability, because the libertarians are high-minded and proud, but they also never get anything more than 3%.
Totally. And he is absolutely right about that he's focused on winning. He's focused on trying to achieve something, whereas from my experience, having been around a lot of the Libertarian Party, they are very interested in the promulgation of ideas. It's really important to the Libertarian Party that they continuously put out a message about like what they view as the wrong direction for the country and the wrong direction for how things are going in the world. And I think that that's more of what the Libertarian Party is about. And I think that's why, we were talking about it earlier about like which candidate is being put up, and, is this a split between, Chase Oliver and the Ron Paul folks and whatever. I mean, this is pretty much the only thing the Libertarian Party has is an ideology. And so if they lose that, then they lose even the thing that they've been standing on for a long time. I think the fact that they've continuously gotten 3% speaks to the fact that there is this large body of people that have been disaffected for a really long time, that no candidate has really gone out and actually tried to, speak to them to say, hey, we're going to try and adopt some of these ideals. I think the only real candidate that ever did that was Ron Paul when he was running as a Republican. He definitely courted that vote, those ideas, and the people who support the party.
Well, and amen. And I just I think Trump opened the door in the minds of some of the libertarians for what we see with the Colorado Libertarian Party and their support for Bobby Kennedy. Because I also think if libertarians had selected their like chief policy goals, I don't understand why they would not have supported Bobby Kennedy to begin with. Because if they're pissed about the COVID response, I guess it goes back to their notion of free markets and interfering with free markets. But the libertarians need to start digging back into their history books and thinking about what tricks have been played with money and what it means to be incorporated and what it means to be a nation and what license that we have given to the free markets with regards to like creating fiat currencies, legal tender currencies.
I think some of it comes down to purist ideology. If you think about the Libertarian Party as a whole, right? I think that it's easy to reject a candidate by saying, he's not libertarian enough. He doesn't really represent what we want. So I don't think it's so much of like an expediency thing or them selecting the best candidate that has a chance at winning. I think it's more like, well, the only thing we really have is ideology. And so if we don't pick somebody who really represents our ideology in a very pure way, that we've betrayed the only thing that we have. I think that there's something to that, and that's why they might not immediately gravitate towards somebody like Bobby Kennedy, but I think that they're probably misguided in that, because if you were to look at which candidate most clearly aligns with the libertarian ethos, it's probably going to be Kennedy, out of all the candidates.
Agreed. But that's all that I wanted to say about libertarianism and Bobby Kennedy. Congratulations to Colorado. It's one of the first things that Colorado has done since. There's been a lot of things that have gone on there, especially with the primary election of Colorado District Number 4 candidate. I'm not even going to say the name. I was so pissed about that. But good job on Colorado and the libertarians of Colorado in embracing sense and supporting a candidate that might have a chance at making some changes in the union. Can we talk about, or did you have anything else that you wanted to say about that, or are you ready to talk about the legal tender acts of 1862, 1860?
Well, I just wanted to read one part of what was in the announcement. So this is the Libertarian Party of Colorado, and it speaks almost exactly to what we just said. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. shares many of the Libertarian Party's core principles, including a commitment to civil liberties, free markets, and non-interventionist foreign policy. His campaigns focus on ending corporate welfare, reducing government spending, and protecting the environment aligns with our core values and resonates with Colorado voters. That right there, I think, very succinctly summarizes what we were talking about. It's that if you look at, like, just do like a purity style test, right? Everything libertarians can't care about, and then you put the candidates who are likely to be elected, and you put them in a matrix, and you start checking off who closely aligns, right? And say, well, what is the alignment score? I think Kennedy would come up in probably at least like the high 80s. And when you have that level of alignment to your party, you really got to ask yourself why you aren't aligning with somebody who can win when the other two choices that are really in front of the people who are going to be going and casting a ballot may be as low as 40 or 30 or 20%. It's like, why wouldn't you pick that candidate versus selecting somebody like Chase Oliver, who doesn't have a chance in hell of being elected and probably doesn't even have the alignment that Kennedy does. So I like this stance from the Colorado Libertarian Party. I think that they've made a good move here. I hope to see more parties sort of thinking hard about what candidate do they really want, because I think that there's a lot of these parties that have these minor party statuses that have ballot access that's that have been getting 1%, whatever. There's the Green Party that's out there. There's a variety of other ones that are kind of on mind, that likely, if they did the same kind of purity test, they'd say, well, this guy aligns. And I think with what was reported recently, with there being 51% of the electorate in the United States now identifying as independent, this has a large chance of going the way that Kennedy wants, and him actually being elected.
Well, and I think the Libertarian Party, when people say that when 51% of people say that they're independent, what they're saying is like the important planks, or the narrative of identity of the Republican and the Democratic parties is out. And I think I mean, when people talk to me about like their conservative, that like their wish for the Republican Party to enforce their conservative values, I think to myself, like, how do you deal with the irony of talking about states' rights and then asking the federal government to enforce your conservative values? And even in going to the Trump Biden debate, like when it came to abortion, I thought that Trump held up probably like his greatest, because I thought Bobby outshone both Trump and Biden and their picayune ad hominem attacks on each other. But Trump really stood up for his abortion. Let the states decide. Let the states decide. And Biden tried to attack him because of his conservative base, and of Trump's conservative base and Biden's liberal base. But Trump stood up, and he said, "Let's make it a state decision. Let's not insert the federal government here." And anyway, I can go on about that forever in circle after circle after circle. National banking acts. Are we ready to talk about them?
Yeah, let's get to that. So I just threw on the screen to kind of close off that conversation the Gallup poll that came out, and that 51% of Americans self-identify as independent. Only 23% say they're Democrats. 25% say they're Republicans. This is the race where you have to court the independents. So I think those who are going out there and finding those voters who are saying neither of these parties really aligns with what I want, that we're going to see all of these candidates scrambling for these votes, because they got to get them if you're going to win the election. But yeah, let's move on to the Civil War Legal Tender Acts. Like, tell us a bit about that. I'll get that on the screen.
Well, identity politics are dead. Monetary politics are in. When we were talking about Bitcoin yesterday, I said that I said that the limited supply of Bitcoin could be a problem, and that when the dollar was made, it was made with some airdrops of cash. And those airdrops of cash came in 1862, and they were large in part to pay the military. So the federal government of the United States had run out of money and needed to
Wait a minute. I love this terminology. I think this is fantastic. So people have talked about the US dollar in terms of like how we talk about cryptocurrencies. They're like, this is the original shitcoin. This is the worst coin that's ever been created. And not only can we talk about that, but you're giving us a historical perspective and saying that there was actually an airdrop of US dollars. So the first dollars that get created actually go to some small number of hands. So that's what you're telling us about in 1862 and what we got on the screen.
Absolutely, and even better than that, not just a small group of hands, but the soldiers. And so it's like, I mean, imagine that you just had one NFT collection on one ordinal collection on Bitcoin, or the Bored Apes on Ethereum or something, and you give this small group of people an airdrop of tokens, and then you say to everybody in the ecosystem, you have to accept this back in payment. And money goes around in a circle, so you're beginning to set up that circle. And so there was an airdrop of 150 million greenbacks or notes that were created or that were dropped in 1862. In I think it was July. I think no, it was February. It was February, and then again another 150 million dropped in 18 or in July, and then a year later, more or less, in March the 3rd of 1863, another 150 million were dropped. And what that did was increase the monetary supply, or the amount of dollars, because dollars had been sort of a figuring out of value of gold and silver before him, but it increased it by 75%. So it went from, I think, actually I don't know the true values off the top of my head. I'd have to look them up. But massively, like all of a sudden there were $2 billion in the world, whereas 2 years earlier there had been $500,000 in the world.
So that is the original debasement of the currency right there. This was a massive increase in the total monetary supply, and just an absolute. If you were holding those, you now lost almost everything.
Well, yes.
The first rug.
The first rug. Well, but the first rug gets something tacked on it sort of immediately afterwards. So then you come to the National Banking Act of 1863, because the Secretary of the Treasury and others were just said, okay, well, we printed all this paper. We know what happens when governments print paper in the past. They immediately go bankrupt. There's a revolution because people are clamoring, like whenever the faith in these banknotes subsides and people realize what has gone on, then there is a revolution, and things don't go well. There are defenestrations and beheadings and all sorts of terrible things. And so what do they do in to change that? There's a long argument over who has, leading into these airdrops, these legal tender acts. There's an argument as to whether the federal government can even do that, because if we go back to the Constitution limits the federal government to gold and silver, and says that the states cannot make fiat currency, which is exactly what the federal government has done. And the argument that they said is, they said, well, the Constitution doesn't say that we can't. It just says that we have to base our money on gold and silver. But it also says that we can call up a military, and it says that we can do everything necessary and proper to call up that military. So they must have meant.
Now that is a very convoluted line of thinking, I've got to say.
I mean, as in convoluted or disingenuous, and
I don't know, it seems the same. Like, it's terrible. Like, how can you possibly come up with that?
It's morally bankrupt. There's the phrase for it. And not only that, well, it wasn't going to work long. And though the politicians had said one thing in 1862 and 1863, they knew the game was going to be up quickly. And so thus comes the National Banking Act of 1863 and 1864. And what that did was create a set of institutions across the country that were going to be national banks rather than the state banks that had existed before. And those state banks could not issue fiat, but could hold and release notes according to essentially the commodity, the private currencies that were in their regions. And so in order to get rid of those state banks and force everybody into using these airdropped greenbacks, let's not even say dollars, because dollars there's silver and gold dollars at the same time. To make people use the greenbacks, they assess a 10% transaction tax on everything done in the state bank notes. And so what you see is something like 15,000 different state banks across the United States dwindle in a year to 500 state banks. And the national banking system emerged. Some of those banks just changed their charters over to the national system, and that's where we get the Federal Reserve System we have today is that national banking system. And part of the setup of the national banking system too was that the reserve banks would hold the gold and silver, and they would pay the member banks in gold and silver, but everybody else got paid in dollars. So they created a two-class system in order to perpetuate the release of fiat currency and hide from the everyman this two-tiered system, and keep the gold and silver in the hands of the financial class. And that's why at a point, 30 years later, you have William Jennings Bryant saying, man will not be crucified on a cross of gold. He said, we played this game. You guys issue currency, you issue money, and but you don't give it, like, gold and silver is not in the hands of the everyman. Actually, there was more silver to be had, so they were arguing for bimetallism and the use of silver, because there's a lot more silver out there in the world. It's harder for the financial class to put that all in a bottle. But I mean, that's also why the United States was so keen to keep Mexico and Argentina under their thumb once they had amassed all of the world's gold in Fort Knox, which leads to part of Argentina, which means silver land in Latin. That's why Argentina had currency problems coming into the 90s, after it had been revealed to them that the United States had been perpetuating a lie in trading our money back and forth at the pegged rate of their peso for so long. So, there's coming out of that too, Hepburn v. Griswold. Do you have Hepburn v. Griswold anywhere?
Let me get a pull up.
It's in the chat. Just putting it in the chat. So in 1870, and maybe to sort of close out an era of this story and move us into the progressive era, the railroad era, the Supreme Court approval of the morally bankrupt and unconstitutional acts that were made by the legislature in the 1860s. Hepburn v. Griswold in, I believe it's 1870. Yeah, I think 1870.
Yep, 1870 right there.
Okay, yeah, in 1870. Hepburn v. Griswold is Salmon P. Chase, who had been the Secretary of the Treasury, and I don't mean to drag Salmon P. Chase through the mud. He's actually a brilliant, an interesting figure in American history. Absolutely, one of the most interesting people in American history I've ever come across. But Salmon P. Chase, as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Hepburn v. Griswold, rules that the federal government can't issue legal tender, and that they had been all in the legislature and the federal government had been all in a tizzy over the Civil War and all this that was happening, and they made a mistake, and that the United States could not issue legal tender. And Ulysses S. Grant was the president at the time, elected 2 new Republican judges, and they overturned that decision the very next year in Knox versus Lee, and said that legal tender is the law of the land and will continue to be so. So that would set us up later for the same progressives, because the Radical Republican Party became very much a progressive party, and progressive was a party of the interests of the railroads, and the railroads bringing their pricing scheme and their national.
So I guess the takeaway that we really should have for this for those of us who are poor history students, which I would maybe say almost every person in the United States is relatively poor understanding of our own history, is that these cases come before the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will 180 and flip flop quite frequently. This stuff happens all the time, and we're developing our understanding and our common desire as a people over time, and so the things that exist today doesn't mean that we can't 180 around and fix it or do something different, because if anything we've seen in the past, these things can be overturned. So yeah, here we're talking Knox versus Lee just essentially does a 180 on the previous decision, right?
Absolutely, and that's why I think it's crucial for we've been fed a line all of our lives from like the 19 like 40s media and on and politicians that um, our Supreme Court justices are merely umpires that call balls and strikes, and that it's not political, and they are people of impeccable authority, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's not the truth. The absolute truth is there is no more political position than a Supreme Court justice. It's even more political than the executive or than any member of legislature. The politicalness of the legislature is ameliorated by the number of them. The politicalness of the executive is ameliorated by the shortness of their tenure, 4 years, limited to 2 terms. The politicalness of the Supreme Court's justice system is ameliorated by giving them as long a view as possible, and that's done through a life term. When you're elected to be the Supreme Court, you're elected to be a justice until you die, kind of like the Pope. And going back to notions of political order that we were emulating from Europe. So if there was going to be a moral decision or something that had to come down to the morals of the federal government or the Union of States, then we better give them a life tenure so they make the best decision possible. But it because they have, we should always remember that they're very political, and maybe packing the court or adding to the number of justices is that will create more conflict at that level. But I don't know that it's necessarily a bad idea. FDR tried to do it. The Democrats talk about doing it now, and
Yeah, there's been talk of expanding the court from 9 to 14 or something like that. I think I've heard some rumblings in that direction.
and isn't 14 an interesting number, because you go from 9, in which you have to have a 4 to 5, so a deciding vote, to 14, in which you could have 7 to 7. Maybe it should be 9 to 15. Maybe it should be 9 to 33. I don't know. We are in the end of the hour. I don't know if I had much to add on. Oh, you know what I did want to add on there was the SEC, because in crypto, and we had to talk about Chia earlier, the IPO, the FIT Act, and this also leads into sort of like I thought the FIT Act was brilliant in understanding that the SEC is not the end all be all of monetary history in the United States. It's merely an arbiter of financial decisions. And if we go back to the Constitution, we were supposed to have private monetary systems, and those private monetary systems were truly most were based on the price of commodities. And so the reliance on the commodity, the CFTC, for making those exchanges, I thought was somebody had read their history and was trying to create a system to get us back there. But like also knowing what we do now about the airdrop of greenbacks to create the federal banknote system that we have today. How does the Howey test? How does the understanding of that system hold up? I don't know that it does, because when I look at that, I said somebody from Florida understood what an inflationary currency meant, and how you could use land as a hedge against that inflation. And
That's
I'll
an
end it.
interesting place to end. Yeah. And Lucas, just a reminder that tomorrow we're going to have a surprise special guest. So we'll be having a guest on the show. Usually we try and do that for Wednesdays, but just so happened that he can make tomorrow work. So it'll be on the 4th of July. We'll have a special guest on the show tomorrow.
Awesome. Are we gonna keep it a surprise, or
Yeah,
are
let's keep
we?
it a surprise. So we'll.
I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. It's not Bobby Kennedy. We'll tell you that. Not that we're not.
Not yet. We're working on it.
All right. See you, Grant. See you, Rusty. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.